YouTube channel. The Watcher of the Absent
invites you to listen to the podcast.
The silent sun that never shines. She is the warmth of my lonely heart.
The album, From Genesis to Revelation.
Recorded at Regent Sound Studio in London in August 1968. Producer, Jonathan King. Sleeve design from an idea by Jonathan King. Released, the 7th of March 1969. Label, Decca, London Records. Highest chart places. United Kingdom, did not chart. United States, did not chart.
Personnel.
Tony Banks. Piano, organ, keyboard, guitar, vocals. Peter Gabriel. Vocals, flute, tambourine. Anthony Phillips. Guitar, vocals, Mike Rutherford. Electric bass, guitar, vocals. John Silver. Drums except for Silent Sun. Chris Stewart. Drums on Silent Sun. Strings and horns arranged and conducted by Arthur Greenslade and Lou Warburton. The songs on the original album, song number 1, Where the Sour Turns to Sweet, was composed by Banks and Gabriel.
Originally planned to be the first single, but shelved after things didn't work out in the studio, this song demonstrates the band's early ability to write short song with multiple parts and tempo changes. However, the use of finger snaps, very much a pop cliché from the era, is one of the many things which date the song. Strings and brass were added later before the album was released. This song was eventually released as the third single, the first after the release of the album, in June 1969 with In Hiding as the B-side.
Song number 2, In the Beginning, was composed by Phillips and Gabriel.
This is a song about the genesis of the earth, but could as well be about the band itself with its hook line, "It has begun. You're in the hands of destiny." The seas, land and mountains are violently formed and life is in its way. The track is one of the few songs that reflect the concept of the album lyrically. The song starts with a single tone oscillation which must have seemed very modern at the time, and there are several layers of acoustic guitars which bury the piano in the background. Banks brings the song to a close with a nice chord progression on piano.
Song number 3, Fireside Song, was composed by Banks, Phillips, and Rutherford.
The intro to this song features Banks on piano again, with a chord progression that hints at the style of many future pieces he would write with Genesis. The rest of the song is an airy vocal and acoustic guitar number with addition of strings, following on the story of creation with the appearance of flora and fauna. It is one of the better pieces on the album, with a decent folk-style chorus reminiscent of Donovan and some of the other folk artists of the day.
Song number 4, The Serpent, was composed by Banks and Gabriel.
The Serpent is one of only 2 tracks from the original 6-song demo tape made in 1967 to have found its way onto the album, the other being In Hiding. Originally titled She Is Beautiful, it was the only Banks and Gabriel song to be recorded on that demo tape. With a different title and lyrics, it is another of the songs to follow the concept via the lines, "And God created man from dust, with a soul inside his mold. And God created womankind, the vessel of Satan's hold." This song could easily have held its own against many other hits of the time with a powerful bass line and strong psychedelic vibe.
Song number 5, Am I Very Wrong, was composed by Banks and Gabriel.
After another 40 seconds of piano from Banks, acoustic guitars, flute, and Gabriel's vocals combine in a song with a verse that is closer to Trespass than any other on the first album. The simple chorus seems to exist to commercialize the song, and it sounds like Rutherford singing it.
Song number 6, In the Wilderness, was composed by Banks, Gabriel, Phillips, and Rutherford.
The song starts with a reprise of In the Wilderness on tremolo guitar. Conqueror is in the style of Bob Dylan. also suggesting the vocal styling of Liam Gallagher of Oasis. Indeed, this is the only Genesis album he claims to like, with the extended syllable at the end of each line of the chorus.
Song number 7, The Conqueror, was composed by Banks and Gabriel.
The song starts with a reprise of In the Wilderness on tremolo guitar. Conqueror is in the style of Bob Dylan, also suggesting the vocal styling of Liam Gallagher of Oasis. Indeed, this is the only Genesis album he claims to like, with the extended syllable at the end of each line of the chorus.
Song number 8, In Hiding, was composed by Phillips and Gabriel.
This is another track that was given in post-production, though you would be forgiven for thinking it was a mellotron used on the song. It was originally recorded on their first demo tape in 1967 as an instrumental titled Patricia, and that version would be released later on some of the many later versions of this album, as well as PN the Genesis Archive 1967 to 1975 collection. The song was also issued as the B-side to When the Sour Turns to Sweet in June 1969.
Song number 9, One Day, was composed by Banks and Gabriel.
Apart from Gabriel's vocal and some strummed guitar, little remains of the other instruments on this track beyond the intro, buried as they are under a heavy orchestral arrangement. It is easy to understand why Phillips, in particular, was so angry at the addition of the strings. Overall, it is another easygoing, commercial track that might have been released as single.
Song number 10, Window, was composed by Phillips and Rutherford.
A short piano introduction, Mistakes and All, is played as the link to this track, and acoustic guitar, strings and horns from the backing to this endearing, quirky love song.
Song number 11, In Limbo, was composed by Banks, Gabriel, Phillips, Rutherford, and Silver.
After a rather pointless instrumental introduction that adds nothing to the song, In Limbo kicks in with a flower power vibe as Gabriel sings, Take Me Away to the Furthest Star in the Sky. It has a similar, joyful feel to I Can't Let Maggie Go by Honeybus, used in a famous UK advert for Nimble low-calorie bread in the 1970s.
Song number 12, The Silent Sun, was composed by Banks and Gabriel.
The second single from the band and the first from the album, The Silent Sun, was released in February 1968 in advance of the album launch with That's Me as the B-side. Gabriel's vocals more than suggest the Bee Gees, with multi-part harmonies in the chorus. A remastered single version would be released under the name Peter Gabriel and Genesis in 2006 with When the Sour Turns to Sweet as the B-side.
Song number 13, A Place to Call My Own, was composed by Banks and Gabriel.
A rather more somber, but delightfully simple track ends the album, featuring vocal and piano, but with a melody of vocal delivery that wouldn't be out of place on The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. The second part of the song has more orchestration than is needed, once again.
Related tracks. While there are many early demo tracks now available, few add much to the story of the band and have not been included here. There are 3 pieces, however, that are particularly worthy of note.
A song called Patricia. Patricia is an instrumental from the original demo tape, recorded as Easter 1967, that was given to Jonathan King. This is the only track from that original recording that has been released. As expected, the quality isn't great, but this is notable as the earliest available recording of the original 4 young members of the band, Banks, 16 years old, Gabriel, 17, Phillips, 15, and Rutherford, 16. Written by Phillips for his first girlfriend when he was 13, this was reworked with lyrics following the original melody used here and became In Hiding. Gabriel is credited as playing the drums on this piece. It was released on the Genesis Archive 1967 to 1975 set.
A song called Hey. This is a demo recorded on the 13th of March 1968 but not developed for the album. It is quite a strong with a catchy, frequent use of Hey. That is very reminiscent of the music being released at the time by the Rolling Stones, the Kinks and the Who.
A song called She Is Beautiful This is an early acoustic demo recorded in 1967, the original version of which from the tape passed to King was supposedly the track that caught his attention due to Gabriel's voice. New lyrics were added, and this became The Serpent, one of 2 tracks from the original tape to make it to an album release. This original demo was Railways on the Genesis Archive 1967 to 1975 set.
Singles from the album From Genesis to Revelation. First single, Side A, The Silent Sun. Side B, That's Me. Released February 2nd, 1968. Second single, Side A Winter's Tale. Side B, One-Eyed Hound. Released May 10th, 1968. Third single, Side A, Where the Sour Turns to Sweet. Side B, In Hiding. Released June 27th, 1969. From Genesis to Revelation, 1969. Genesis' first album was not called Trespass, but From Genesis to Revelation. Many fans tend to count it as their 0th album. It shows no, or at best, only the most minuscule traces of the style that would make them well-known later, and therefore frequently meets with a refusal and lack of affection. Justly so. The band did not have the lineup they got known with yet. One could say they did not even exist. They came together to record demo tapes in the first place. All of them knew each other from Charterhouse Public School. The songwriter team Rutherford and Anthony Phillips asked Tony Banks to play the piano for them. Banks only agreed if he could bring his songwriting partner Peter Gabriel to record a song. Soon they were convinced that Gabriel's voice sounded better than Phillips, so he ended up singing on all the songs. When he did not sing, Phillips played the guitar, a position he would retain up to Trespass. Initially, the drums were played by one Chris Stewart, though the drumming on the album would be done by John Silver. The drummer stool would not be filled permanently until Phil Collins joined Genesis. Only with him did the band find someone who was accepted as a full member and could incorporate himself. Demos. These boys, most of them were around 17 at the time, managed to land a record contract with Jonjo Music in August 1967 that only meant that a single would be released. King was an alumnus of Charterhouse and had quite a successful hit with Everyone's Gone to the Moon, a shallow pop song, though that may have been. He nevertheless seemed to be a person of success and influence, and they found it very promising that they could have him produce them. They recorded 2 singles with King that came out in February and May 1968. Both did just well enough that Kind decided to record a full album with the band during the summer holidays. This was quite an unusual move. Rock music was quite a young business then. It was run by young people and was rather looked down upon by others in the world of music. Rock was new territory, with infinite space to explore, try out, and invent things in music as well as business. Radio stations were important means of distribution, for in those times, you could not read as much about pop music in a whole year as you now can in one day, as Tony Banks put it. The band was keen to get into this business. In order to please Jonathan King, who liked it simple, they wrote a song in the style of the Bee Gees. Silent Sunday. King liked it and made it the first of the 2 singles. The band was developing in another direction, though. Their music was more and more determined by long, meandering passages, a style they would develop and extend later on. Besides the usual guitars, it was Tony Banks' organ playing that left its mark. According to Anthony Phillips, Banks was the most accomplished of the instrumentalists. None of this can be heard on From Genesis to Revelation, though. Recording, Jonathan King christened the band Genesis. He found it a fitting name for a new creation that would mark the beginning of his career as a serious producer. He attempted to drive them in the same direction as the singles that had been gentle and acoustic. For one thing, he felt that there was a niche for them, and for another, such music did not require a large number of instruments that the band could not afford. Another reason was the aim for mass compatibility in easy listening. Not only did he try to steer the band away from all the organ nonsense, but he also had the idea to tell a story in the album, the story from Genesis to Revelation, which also means that The Lamb was not the band's first concept album. Did that idea come from the band name or vice versa? Who knows? It turned out that there was an American band called Genesis, too. on short notice, the band name was dropped from the cover so that it only had the album title in old-fashioned Gothic print. It is said that this caused record stores to place the album in the corner for religious music, which in turn would have contributed to the meager sales. But that may be a pious legend. As with the Silent Sun single, string arrangements were added to the recorded songs. It was a fait accompli for the band, who only found out when the album was released. They had accepted the strings for the single, but this time Anthony Phillips found them terrible, disfiguring, overly sweet, and not at all corresponding to the simple and straight approach of the band. The fourth CD on Archive I 1967 to 1975 contains several songs from the album without the strings, FGTR naked, as it were. From them, one gets a good impression of what was originally intended. The album. One of the problems in discussing the album is the fact that it has been released several times over on vinyl and CD with varying track lists. Usually, the singles or other songs augmented the songs from the original version. This review shall concern itself with the original track list. The songs are quite simple. The leading instruments are piano, guitar, and vocals, plus the strings. The overall sound of the album is undemonstrative. There are no banging drums, no overpowering electric guitars, none of no aggression that surfaces in the knife. Everything is lovely and peaceful. A hippie album? The lyrics are quite simple. At times, they are full of pseudo-sophisticated mock social criticism with imagery that tries to be poetic. The first half of the album actually does sort of follow the creation as described in the Bible. In the beginning does not go far beyond a longer rephrasing of Die Erde war wust und die Leer. Fireside song outlines something like, on the first morning, the world was peaceful and beautiful, and the serpent describes man as innocent and free of sin right after the creation. The second half of the album moves to more general topics. There is talk of aggressive rich conquerors, of limbo, but also of windows out of the confusion. Love is declared in one day and, of course, also in Silent Sunday. It all ends with the presentation that the devil is dead, and one has finally found a place to call one's own. Musically, the songs stick to the conventional pattern of verse and chorus. There are several unconnected interludes between the rather short songs in which some of the tunes are reprised. What is remarkable is the fact that electric guitars are only used to characterize something as evil. Apart from the strings, that are not used for every song, there is also a brass group and a solo trumpet. They all give the album a gentle feel. At the time the album was recorded, the band were not tuned into each other. In fact, they had hardly managed their instruments. Some of the flaws can be heard on the album, e.g., a bum note in the window intro. Gabriel forces his voice up for In the Wilderness almost beyond his possibilities. The flute he plays on Am I Very Wrong is barely not off-key, but the whole song seems constantly on the brink of collapsing. The whole production is amateurish. The fade-out in A Place to Call My Own is extremely sudden, probably owing to the lack of space on the LP. Some of the songs still capture the listener's attention. Where the Sour Turns to Sweet, right at the beginning, has acceptable lyrics alongside a mysterious, quiet tune penned by Banks and Gabriel that can muster some energy in the chorus. The harsh sounds of In the Beginning make one listen twice, too. The Serpent, the original of which was called She Is Beautiful, tries to sound like the Rolling Stones. In the Wilderness is, at its core, an interesting composition that is absolutely drowned in violins. One Day sounds like the good old Beatles, and Silent Sun aims at a hymnic attitude that is actually really touching. There are good moments on the record, but if you use later Genesis qualities as a standard, you will be disappointed. The songs run their course without causing much excitement, and there are hardly any artistic detours. It should be mentioned that there is also a mono version of the album, which is an independent mix, so not just a 2-into-1 mix of the stereo version. What is most remarkable about the mono version is that it has almost no echo effect on the vocals, and the string and brass groups do not come so far to the fore. Several songs are a few seconds longer or shorter. The overall artistic impression is not affected. So then, it was only after the release of the album that the band began to play shows and really become a tight formation. Genesis split from Jonathan King as a producer after their contract, which had been shortened to 1 year, had run out. Praise to the parents of the band members, because they insisted on reducing the runtime of the contract from 5 years to 12 months. Jonathan King certainly meant well, but he was the wrong person for what the band was going to do. Still, he did send Genesis on their way and gave the band a start that was not too easy, as some of them felt in retrospect. He prompted them to fight for their music and to look for the right partners. Soon after, they met Tony Stratton Smith, who enabled them to properly start their career with another album, Trespass. The article was written by Thomas Schrage and translated into English by Martin Klinkhart.
Pick me up, put me down, push me in, turn me round, switch me on, let me go.
While Trespass is often considered the first real Genesis release, even by some of the band themselves, From Genesis to Revelation remains overlooked. Rutherford would later call it a bunch of kids on holiday time and refer to Trespass as the first album from Genesis band. However, Banks is more philosophical, saying,
I have quite a lot of affection for From Genesis to Revelation. I don't love it or anything, but it was part of my childhood.
While From Genesis to Revelation was released in 1969, most of the tracks have been written between 1967 and 1968, with demos recorded at several sessions arranged by Jonathan King. 2 singles were released in advance of the album. The Silent Sun, with That's Me as the B-side on February 22nd, 1968, and A Winter's Tale, with One-Eyed Hound as the B-side on May 10th, 1968. Sales were nothing special, but it was enough to convince King and Decca to invest further in a full album. For some reason, A Winter Tale was never included on the original release, even though it was stronger than many of the songs that made it to the final album. At the time, the band viewed themselves primarily as songwriters and had focused on straight pop songs, as Rutherford later called them, in the hope that others would record them. As was the case with many artists of the time, without at least some chart success, it was difficult to start as a songwriter, so recording your own material yourself was often a better option. Indeed, Elton John says the only reason he began to record his songs was that he and Bernie Taupin couldn't find anyone to record them. Written against a backdrop of the star chart success of late 60s psychedelia, the album itself is consistent with the tone of many contemporary bands, a time when the Beatles, Donovan, The Kinks, The Who, and occasionally even Pink Floyd were regularly in the top 10 in the UK. The Bee Gees had reached #1 with their first single, Massachusetts, in 1967, definitely an influence on some of the songs that Genesis were writing, while the first single, The Silent Sun, was written to appease King, who wanted them to simplify their arrangements for commercial reasons. The band was daunted at the prospect of filling a whole long player. So King proposed a concept album loosely based on the Bible's Book of Genesis, with short instrumental pieces linking the songs. Rutherford claims they were too young and insecure to tell King to piss off with his suggestion. In inter-song links, we hear many short piano and guitar pieces with chord progressions and textures that hint at what would come later. The concept itself isn't strictly adhered to throughout the album, with only a few songs lyrically portraying the Book of Genesis, such as In the Beginning, Fireside Song, and The Serpent, but several take a more abstract slant on the concept. In the Bible, Genesis covers the creation of earth in 6 days, the story of Adam and Eve, Noah's Ark, and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, through to the rise of the Israelites and the story of Joseph, later to be immortalized in Rice and Lloyd Webber's famous musical. While all the tracks are credited to Genesis, the band was still writing in pairs. Rutherford concedes that he and Phillips hadn't progressed with their songwriting as much as Gabriel and Banks, who wrote most of the album. It was recorded in just 3 days in August 1968 at Regent Sound Studio B in Denmark Street, just off Charing Cross Road in London. Strings were later added to some of the tracks, as was common at the time, but it was something that the band was not initially aware of and strongly disagreed with, causing Phillips to storm out of the studio on the last day of mixing. King had come up with the name Genesis to signify that it was early in his production career as much as anything else, but it was discovered relatively late that the name was already in use by a band in the US. King refused to change it, coming up with the idea of having a black album sleeve with the title in small Gothic characters, so as not to feature the band name. Of course, this did little to promote the album visually in the racks of the record stores. Records were often purchased after a lengthy browse through the sleeves in a store, and in many cases, the initial impact of the sleeve design had as much to do with a potential purchase as the band name of their music. Having no information on the back of the cover meant it was often classified as religious music based on the title and was filed under the section in stores. That the band chose to be known as Genesis in the UK and Revelation internationally, a name that thankfully didn't last long, didn't help much. King now accepts that all of this was a bad idea and probably hindered the band's success. But what if the album had been a success? Would the band's reinvention as a progressive rock band have been hindered 50 years ago? The album sold between 600 and 700 copies in the following year. The album does contain several strong songs that could have been hits given the right promotion, such as In the Wilderness and Silent Sun. Certainly, sleeve design and the unfortunate religious classification were factors, but Decca also lacked experience in promoting a band who were somewhat out of the ordinary. King was also losing interest after the release of the album and was not eager to follow the band towards the more experimental and complex direction in which they were heading. Due to the diligence of their parents, given how young the boys were at the time, the proposed 5-year deal was reduced to 1 year, and the band parted company with both King and Decca in late 1969. King still retains the rights and associated recordings under the John Joe publishing name and has released them under several titles, often adding additional tracks from the early demo recordings. At the time of writing, at least 10 different versions of the album have been released under various names, including in the beginning, Rock Roots, Where the Sour Turns T.O. Sweet, and The World Was. Tapes of some additional material recorded at the time were found in storage at Regent Sound Studios when the studio was sold, and a collection of these and some new mixes was released as a digital download in 2017 titled Genesis 50 Years AGO. The tagline, featuring recently discovered multiple tracks never heard before, was used on the cover. Although this being 1968, the songs were only recorded in 4 tracks anyway, with the band on track 1, vocals on track 2, and usually strings and brass on the other 2 tracks. Banks notes that the band did try to recover the rights, but that King wanted a substantial sum in return. The article was written by Stuart McFarlane.
We're waiting for you. Come and join us now. We need you with us. Come and join us now.
Thank you for listening to the podcast.